Well, we still got a few seconds. I really love having a spouse. I just drink out of her stuff all the time. Don't even ask. She does it to me, too. I'd actually say she does it to me more than I do it to her. Suddenly my glass is gone. I don't know what's happened. And I find it and it's empty,
You probably just drank it and forgot.
That's what you call sharing.
Yeah, right. One flesh.
We have a bottle of water sitting beside our field, and every time I want to take a fill, that bottle's empty.
Yeah.
Don't understand it.
Uh-huh.
Well, there might not quite be about that much left in that bottle of water.
Just the dregs.
So I have to go all around the counter, get another one, set it down there.
All of the hardship we endure.
Yeah, all that extra walking.
Well, at this point, I'm just waiting till Catherine gets back and then we can pray. Looks like we're going to have a slightly smaller group this week. That's okay. Still a pretty good number. Well, like I said last week, we'll plan on not meeting next week since it's Easter Sunday. I hope you're all going to get to spend time with family or family in Christ.
I will be out of town.
Yeah. I know a number of people are traveling. My mom just called me today to see if there's some way we can get together around Easter. So, poor mom. She's got 2 preacher sons who are hard to see on
Sunday.
Well, I can get off, but I don't of all Sundays, I don't want to be off on Easter or Christmas or, those are some of my favorite Sundays to be a pastor. So, well, would anybody be willing to open us in prayer? I love this part. People look down, they'll kind of look out of the corner of their eyes.
Catherine to start.
I think
you missed last week. I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Repeat.
Margie's willing. She just volunteered.
Father, we thank you for this blessed time to be able to come together, to learn more about your word, to plant these seeds in our hearts, and just to try to understand. So open our minds and our hearts and our ears to the words that we hear, that we can have a better understanding of your word. We ask your blessings upon each and every one here in a safe trip. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we've already had some good questions.
You missed it.
I know. Well, we're going to cover it all.
It's my fault.
Diana, would you just remind me when we get to that point to address that question? Okay, thank you. So we're starting in chapter 25. We actually got through chapter 25, verse 18 last week. And like I said, I would love to read it all, but I think we're just going to kind of jump from point to point. I'm assuming that you have read this somewhat recently. One of the first things I think worthy of note, and at any time if there's a question or something that you notice, let me know, is in verse 21, it says that Isaac prayed for Rebekah because she was barren. So a couple of questions. Why would it be significant that Rebekah was barren?
That's the one where the line is coming
The line, what line?
through. Jesus is line.
Well, okay, that's, yes, as a Christian, we have to say, agreed, yes, and that is...
Or the Jews? Or no?
Yeah, well, yes, the Jews, yes. The Israelites, yes. And you're saying all right things. These are all great answers.
That's the wrong answer.
No.
He's such a diplomat.
No. I'm saying they're all right answers. I would say you're thinking backwards through the Bible, which is good. There's no way for us not to do it. See if you can think forwards, starting from, the beginning of Genesis. What has Genesis been preparing us for this whole time? What happens if Rebekah's barren? Well, okay, that's true. I guess what I'm trying to fish out. What I'm trying to fish out is the blessing can't happen.
Yeah.
Remember, Abraham was promised that he would be blessed to be the father of nations. Oh, sorry, you're looking at weird things of me. I'll show you this.
That's weird.
Yeah, sorry, this is a bunch of Hebrew. So God promised Abraham that he would make him the father of nations, and that implies he's going to be the father of a lot of kids and grandkids and great-great-grandkids. So if his daughter-in-law is barren, then that's a threat to God's promise. So Isaac prays for her, and this I think is worth noting because have you noticed someone praying for somebody else yet in the story of Genesis?
I don't think they have they?
I believe we have.
No. Well, what did Abraham's servant, you would have he treated the Lord in behalf of his wife since she was sterile?
Entreated the Lord. Yeah, he prayed.
He prayed.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham's servant did ask the Lord
He
for.
prayed that he would
That's right. When
for himself more than
when he was sent out on his task, he prayed to the Lord, asking him to bless his endeavors, which is worth noting. Just if we're asking the question about have we seen prayer before, but have we seen someone interceding for someone else before? We have, in fact. So one example is Abraham praying, I believe, for Abimelech. Let's see. First of all, maybe the first instance might have been with the Pharaoh when he takes Sarah as her wife. Let's see if he prays over Pharaoh. No, he doesn't do it for Pharaoh, or doesn't mention it, but I believe he does it with Abimelech, which is in chapter, where is that? This isn't necessarily worth the hunt. I'm quite confident it's true, if you'll believe me.
Tell us what you.
What I'm trying to point out is, one, just a simple observation that intercession, or praying for another person, or you might also call it supplication, asking God for things for other people, is something that's present from the first pages of the Bible. Okay? So that's just something worth noting. God's people have always prayed for other people. But also, there seems to be something unique about the prayers of the person who is blessed. Abraham prays for somebody and he's healed. Isaac prays for his wife and she's healed. And it seems to be, and I think it becomes clear as you go through the story when you notice who's praying for whom. The people that God elects, who he chooses to lead his people or to bring the blessing further, tend to have a unique role of interceding, standing in the gap as Moses did. And Moses is another example. Later on, he will intercede on behalf of the people. You know, after the golden calf episode, he prays for them, and then God decides not to destroy them all. So this is, I think, the Bible is teaching us, Genesis is teaching us slowly the unique role that his people have in praying for one another and for the world. Now, and also think about it, the blessing to Abraham wasn't just that he was going to be the father of nations. It was that through him, blessing would come to the nations. And we as Christians look back on that promise and say that was fulfilled in Jesus. Through Jesus, blessing has come to all the nations. But another way, a larger part of that is that, this just the snowballs into all of these other ideas that develop in the Bible. Israel becomes God's nation that he chooses to be a nation of priests to all the other nations. He wants them to be representatives to all the other nations. And every Israelite is supposed to be, in some general sense, a priest. And that one of the priest's main jobs was to intercede for others. The priests within the Israelites were supposed to pray and intercede for the whole nation. And if the whole nation is supposed to be a nation of priests, which we'll get to that later, that's Exodus chapter 19, then that also seems to imply that they're supposed to be praying for other nations, in my mind. But we don't need to go that far. Hopefully, that point will be proved along the way. Any questions or notes on that? And if you think you're making much too much out of this point, in a sense, you're right. But part of what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm trying to point out this idea to you because it will show up more and more. And I'm just bringing in all this stuff from later in the Bible and showing you how this points to that. These ideas are being developed early on. Also, was this Isaac? Isaac has a wife, Rebekah, and she's barren. So he prays for her, and then God heals her, and she's able to have children. But did Isaac have any other options? Could he have done something else when he found out his wife was barren and didn't have children?
Or somebody else had his baby.
Right, like his father, Abraham. Remember, Abraham had 2 wives, the Egyptian slave Hagar that he impregnated, and multiple concubines. We don't know how many. I don't think it lists how many. So I think I just read this in a commentary. I haven't double checked, but I think Isaac is monogamous throughout his lifetime. I don't know if he ever gets another wife. I believe, actually, we do hear about Isaac later on, but I don't remember if it mentions a wife. After this story, with the blessing and everything being stolen, we don't ever hear about Rebekah again. But as far as I know, he's monogamous, which is interesting for us because the Old Testament doesn't explicitly teach. There's no command saying you have to be monogamous. You can only ever have one wife or something like that. But one of the questions is the narrative teaching this indirectly? Should we look at Isaac and say maybe he kind of learned a lesson from his dad? He saw all of the problems with Hagar, the slave, and all the concubines, and he kind of said, I'm going to steer clear of that. Cue the interesting, funny comment from Chris.
Yeah, I didn't say nothing. I'm just agreeing. Ain't no maybe about it. He did say that.
So, yeah, that's one thing. Also, as we read on, he prays or entreats the Lord for her and has this kind of priestly role. Then when she's pregnant, the kids are struggling within her, and so she goes to the Lord. In verse 22, it says, so she went to inquire of the Lord, which is just really fascinating. I didn't have time to study this, but my question then was, where did she go? It sounds like she went somewhere to talk to God. So I wonder if there was some special place that they had, or this is before the tabernacle has been built. This is before there's a temple. There hasn't been any mention of a special place they went to pray or to talk to God. But so I'm just pointing out there seems to have been some sort of place that she went to talk to God. And there normally is. God's people often do have a special place to go to talk to God or to encounter Him. In verses 25 and 26, we get kind of the explanation for why they're called. Well, we should read what Yahweh says to her. Would someone read verse 23?
The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the other will serve them again.
Okay, thank you. So I think if we're kind of paying attention to how the story is developed, first of all, there's all this nations language from kind of at least from Genesis 10 onwards. And then Genesis 10, we had the list of all these nations that came about, the table of nations. In Genesis 11, we had the Tower of Babel. And then remember, they got separated at the end. They got divided out, and then all those people became the different nations. Abraham, chapter 12, is promised that all the nations will be blessed through him. And here we get this promise about 2 nations being in her womb, and they're going to be divided. And think about it. There have been all these stories of division. Like I said, at Babel, all the nations were divided. Or remember, Abraham and Lot, they come into the land, they both multiply, they start getting in each other's business, and then they divide. Same thing happens with, I think we talked about it like last week or the week before. I can't remember. We didn't read it, but Abimelech, this Philistine king, comes to Abraham at one point, and he's like, because their people are fighting over wells, and he says, hey, let's make a covenant that we're not going to hurt each other or get in each other's space. And then they agree to separate. So there's kind of this running theme of people contending with each other, being in each other's space, and then having to divide, having to separate. Then in verses 25 and 26, we get the explanation of Esau and Jacob's name. Why was Esau called Esau? Because his body was like a hairy mantle. Yeah? So I don't know exactly what Esau means. I guess I can click on it here. Let's see.
Mine says red. Oh, no, that's Edom.
That's Edom, yeah. Esau, yeah, your Bibles are probably doing a good job of telling what that means. Harry's probably fine. This definition doesn't really tell me. But anyways, so he's called that because he looks hairy, and Jacob is called Jacob. Why? He's a grabber. So one thing I was reading was saying his parents, when they named him this, probably weren't trying to say anything about his character. I mean, he was a baby. It doesn't only have negative connotations. I can't remember what they said it could mean. Oh, I think this might be. Let me see if I can find what it meant. Oh, yeah. May God protect. Okay, so it had that potential meaning, but it's clear, it has an association with the word heel, and he came out grabbing his heel. So they probably meant it in terms of may God protect, but it becomes quickly clear that there's another association with that by calling someone heely or something. It's like, what happens if you grab someone's heel while they're walking or running? They're going to trip. So this is what kind of, he's someone who's deceptive. He'll trip other people up. And so as the story develops, you see him do that. Trips up his brother almost immediately, stealing his brother's birthright. But then it also explains the origin of the word Edom. In verse 30, it's, he comes in, he's famished, and he says, let me eat some of that red pottage, for I'm famished. Therefore, his name was called Edom, I believe, because Edom means red. So why do you think they included this detail about Edom? Edom was a nation that was on the border of Israel. So, this is too small for you to see. I wonder. Edom, eventually, let's see, down here, that would be about, I think, right here. Edom was a nation. Here's Israel right here. And Edom would have been, I think, somewhere around here. So they bordered on Israel. Now, later, they go to war with Israel and Judah. Eventually, they kind of help sell out Judah so that they're taken into captivity. And then there are prophecies later on about God's judgment and wrath are forever going to be against Edom. But part of the story is these are long, far, far back, these are relatives. By the time we get to David and Solomon and the kings, they're like distant relatives. But if you're paying attention to the story, all these people in the story at some point are related, going far enough back. Whether it's Genesis 11 or Genesis 1, go far enough back, they're all family. So it's kind of heartbreaking, And think about it. In her womb are two sons who are going to become two nations, are going to be separated. That's kind of the story of the Bible. Again and again, you have siblings and family members who get in conflict with each other and then have to separate. And you might say that part of the question I think that the story begs is, when are we going to have some not separation? When are we going to have some unity? When are we going to have peace? Is fruitfulness and blessing always going to result in division and conflict? And I think if you pay attention to the story of Genesis, you will see that question being addressed. So keep that question in your mind, this sibling rivalry, war between family members, and the question of peace and reconciliation. Okay? Okay, so then we get to the question of the birthright. Rita asked a really good question. She came in and she said, what is a birthright? So one way to explain it is to say, the birthright a person has a birthright because they were born in a certain order. The first son who was born has the right to the inheritance. And by the inheritance, my understanding is for ancient Israelites, the firstborn son inherited 2/3 of the father's land, animals, everything. And then the other sons, however many they were, got to kind of divide up the rest, probably in equal shares. So this actually plays a role all throughout the Bible, the question of kind of the firstborn, the inheritance, because Jesus is the firstborn from the dead. He is our eldest brother. And so there's a sense in which, because he is our brother and he's our eldest, he's gotten the inheritance of the kingdom, but he's kind of, I'm about to say this in a confusing way. Because with Jesus, I don't know if I can explain that in a good way. I do think it plays into the question of Jesus being the firstborn of our family. But we don't enter into competition with him. It's not like he gets 2/3 and then we get 1/3. We share in all of his inheritance. He shares his inheritance with us. So he plays by, his kingdom works by different rules. His inheritance works by different rules than this. But the question of inheritance is all throughout the Bible. That language is used in the New Testament to talk about our inheritance is the kingdom of God, the Spirit of God. And, the story with Elijah and Elisha. Do you remember that story? Before Elijah dies, Elisha, who becomes a prophet after him, comes up to him and he says, hey, I think Elijah says, what can I do for you? And because he knows he's about to be taken away. And Elisha says, give me a double portion of your spirit. And he's not saying, give me twice as much of God's spirit as you have. He's saying, I think scholars have explained it as like, instead of just getting 1/3 of Elijah's portion, he's asking for 2/3 of Elijah's portion of his spirit. Because a portion, each son would have gotten a portion except for the firstborn, who got 2 portions. He got 2/3. I feel like I'm being confusing, partially because I'm pretty sure I'm explaining it right, but I'm a little shaky on these. I haven't looked at this in a while. But the double portion is language about the inheritance. So it then says in the end that Esau despised his birthright. So what's the issue here? Why is this a big deal that Esau sold his birthright and despised it?
It didn't mean anything to him. And he surely knew how much he could.
Yeah, I mean, should we assume at this point in the story that Esau knew that, like, Abraham's blessing could come to him?
I think so.
Like maybe his parents brought him up saying, hey, you're the child of blessing. God is going to make nations out of you because he promised it to your grandpa. Maybe, or maybe God communicated it to, maybe he knew that he was, through him, blessing could come. We don't know. It's worth saying the Bible doesn't tell us whether or not he knew that Abraham's blessing was coming to him. At the very least, he knew that he was supposed to get his parents' inheritance. He was supposed to get most of the stuff. And for him to sell his birthright would probably be understood as kind of an insult or a ridiculous or absurd thing to do for anybody. You're giving away your future. And to me, it always seemed kind of short-sighted, like he can't have been that famished. He can't have been that hungry to really think he was going to die. So I think I've always read this as like, he got a little over dramatic and he didn't take it seriously enough. Maybe there's the option of saying he really was in that desperate of a place and he really was dying. And Jacob was just a cruel younger brother who took advantage and saw his older brother dying and was like, yeah, give me your birthright. Yeah, it seems like his mama would have, but...
He didn't say he despised his birthright until after he had eaten.
Until after he had eaten?
Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
Mm-hmm.
What's that mean? Did he despise his brother?
Well, I think, the deal was he came in and he said, give me some of that food. Mm-hmm. And Jacob said, I'll give you this food, or if you give me your birthright. So when he received the food, That was him agreeing to that deal. All right, yeah, I'll eat your food. I'm eating it. It was delicious, thank you. Okay, here's my birthright. So by giving up his birthright to his brother, he was despising it. He was hating his birthright. Does that make sense? He's treating. What way are you going?
Well, we're probably going that he didn't despise it till he gave it away.
Yeah.
After he gave it away, he despised it.
You know, mine says, I hate it that I did this.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you know, I hate my birthright. I don't want you. I don't know.
I think.
Mine says Esau cared little for his birthright.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I thought when it said it afterwards, it was just kind of a summary statement of what
Yeah.
happened before.
I think it's intended to just summarize what happened in that little story. So you read the whole story, you hear the little exchange between him and his brother, and then it says, and so.
And he didn't think ahead, he was just thinking in the moment.
Yeah. Yep.
And I've always thought, what if he really was starving? It really wouldn't be, useful to him if he died. But it says that he ate and drank and got up and went away. So he was probably okay. If
Yeah.
you're starving, you probably won't just stand up and walk off, you know?
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, if he had came in and passed out on the floor, and he hadn't eaten in like 2 weeks, he wouldn't just eat a meal and then be like, all right, see you later.
It says to flip over to Hebrews 12:16, lest there be any fornicator or profound person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright.
Yeah.
So it's just picked him right to the fact of, for food, he sold it.
Yeah, yeah. And there are other questions that passage begs. But yeah, no, Hebrews clearly sees it. It kind of speaks of it almost like, not making fun of him, but being like, and for one morsel of food, he gave up his birthright. So this is stage one of the story. We got to move on. This is stage one of the story because the whole next story is about him stealing the blessing. Now, what's the difference between the inheritance, like stealing the birthright, and stealing the blessing?
I would think the inheritance might be from his parents, but the blessing is like from God.
Yeah, I think that's. Let's read the blessing, which is in chapter 27, and it begins. Let's just go ahead and someone read chapter 27, verse 27 through verse 29.
And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing, and blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine.
One more.
Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you.
Okay. So how would we just try and sum up the blessing in your own words? What is this blessing?
It's just everything you needed.
Okay,
He took
yeah.
care of everything.
Sure. He's going to have everything. How else would you express it?
Maybe lordship over his brothers.
Lordship or dominion. Mm-hmm.
You have nations bow down to you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the first part, may God give you the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, and abundance of grain and new wine. That's a depiction of, well, okay, yes, so you see where we're going. That's like fruitfulness, multiplication, thriving, flourishing, okay? So on the one hand, the blessing is abundance, fruitfulness. And on the other hand, it's authority or dominion, which, think back, Genesis chapter 1. When God created humanity, it says that he blessed them. Let's see, this is chapter 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion. Okay? Over the fish, and over this, and over that. So God humans weren't the only ones that God blessed. But our blessing was unique in that not only were we blessed to be fruitful, but we were blessed also to have dominion. And so here, Isaac is, in a sense, expressing that same blessing to his son. I'm blessing you with fruitfulness, abundance, and I'm blessing you with dominion. And that dominion is experienced through other people serving him and over having dominion over his brothers. Also, who are his brothers? How many brothers does Isaac have? Or, at this point, Jacob. At this point, no, that's his sons. He has 12 sons. And no, at this point, Jacob only has Esau as his brother. So brothers here probably doesn't mean literal brothers. It means like over, in a sense, like Esau becomes Edom, right? So I think this is probably another way of expressing like you're going to have dominion over other nations, over all these other basically distant relatives around you. Now, this is something to pay attention to because it comes up again with other generations. So Jacob will have 12 sons. And do you remember Jacob's dream, or Joseph's dreams? Remember he gets a coat of many colors and then he has those 2 dreams about ruling over his brothers. And those are also images of fruitfulness, like grain. His stalk stands upright and his others, they bow down. And then Joseph has this life of fruitfulness and then he ends up, basically second in command of Egypt. So he then has dominion over his brothers and he's fruitful. So this is another thing that plays out again and again. Let's see, is there anything else worth... Oh, he says, cursed be those who curse you and blessed be those who bless you. Does that sound familiar? That was language originally that God said to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. In chapter 12 says, Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse. Sound familiar? Yeah, so in some ways, Isaac is just kind of repeating the Genesis 1 blessing and God's original promise to Abraham, to his own son. But these are beautiful images of kind of what blessing looks like. Dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth. Later on in the Levitical priesthood, the fat of an animal is like the most valuable thing to offer up in sacrifice. So fatness is often an image of like the richest stuff nature has to give. Let's see, any other, do you have any questions or comments about that? Going back just a little bit, because I skipped over Diana's question. I totally skipped over it. I don't remember why I skipped forward like that. I think I just got excited. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about, Jacob steals the birthright and then he steals the blessing. And the birthright was just basically the right of the firstborn. And remember, the prophecy was the younger, or the elder shall serve the younger. And then at the end, when he receives a blessing, sure enough, Isaac blesses him and says, your brothers will serve you. So it becomes confirmation. So there's kind of that 2-part. He steals both from his brother and confirms his deceptive kind of name. So then in chapter 26, we start out and someone just read chapter 26, verse 1 and 2.
There was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you.
Okay. So this is really I think, important and fascinating. First, it reminds us that this is the second famine. The first one was in the time of Abraham. So it's trying to make sure we remember the famine that Abraham experienced. Do you remember what Abraham did when there was a famine? Abraham left the land and went to Egypt. That was when he went and he lied to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh took his wife. And we asked at that time, I don't know if you remember, we talked about, should Abraham have left the land? Because the land was what was promised to him. And, the story didn't tell us. But then here we come to this point in the story. It says, okay, there's another famine, and Isaac is faced with the same choice that Abraham was. And God says to him, do not go to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. So he's told to stay in the land of the promise. So this is a part of how I think the Old Testament communicates to us. This is how it teaches. It didn't tell us, and, Abraham went to Egypt and he shouldn't have. God did not like that. You just keep reading the story and you get to Isaac and God tells him, hey, don't go down to Egypt. And then you think, oh, but that's what Abraham did. Should Abraham have not gone down to Egypt? So kind of as you read the story and you get more details about what God's will is and how he wants things to unfold, you start to kind of think back on the stories that have already happened and think, I wonder if that, so Isaac only had one wife. I wonder if Abraham should have stuck with one wife. So Isaac was supposed to stay in the land. I wonder if Abraham was supposed to stay in the land. See what I'm saying? The story teaches you how to interpret itself, how to interpret the story. That's why the Old Testament, all of it, you have to read and reread. Because you learn things later in the story that when you go back, you go, oh man, see, now I see that was a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. Classic mistake. Left the land. Yes. Yeah. So when he says don't leave the land, he's talking about don't leave the promised land. Don't leave Canaan. Because if you go down to Egypt, you're out of the promised land. And remember, because we kind of talked about it, Abraham got he got the promise of blessing, and then he got to the land, and then there was a famine, and first thing he did was leave to Egypt, so he left the promised land, and then he gave away his wife. And so he immediately risked everything God had promised him. And if you're paying attention, you're like, no, what? Stop that! But here with Isaac, we already see some things changing. Isaac's wife can't bear, so he prays for her. Instead of going another route, he trusts God to fix the problem. And he seems to perhaps be learning from his father's mistakes. We don't know. It's also interesting, if you look at so I'll read this, I'll give you guys a break. Verse 6 of chapter 26. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister, for he feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she was fair to look on. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac fondling Rebekah, his wife. So, a couple things. This should all sound very, very, very familiar, right? This is almost word for word exactly what happened to Abraham. He went to the same place, Gerar, to the same king, Abimelech, said the exact same thing to people that she was his sister for the same reason, because he feared that they would kill him. I mean, it's like almost one for one, the exact same thing. And then, and it says she was fair to look upon. Now, I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure 26 verse 7. See, she is my sister, for he was afraid. My wife, the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. And the word here is the Hebrew word tov. So this is just a little bit nerdy, but in the garden with Adam and Eve, when Eve saw the fruit, she saw that it was good or delicious or actually beautiful. And that behind that is the word tov. And so she took it. So throughout the Bible, there are multiple stories where someone sees something, that it's good, and then they take it. So actually, earlier in the story, when Pharaoh saw Sarah, he saw that she was beautiful, and he took her. Here, we have a similar situation. Rebekah is very beautiful, and the fear is she was good to look at. This is almost the exact same language as the fruit in the garden. She was beautiful to look at. And he was afraid that they were going to take her. But in this case, they don't. So there's these little stories will come up. It happens again, I've told you before, with David and Bathsheba. He sees her bathing on the roof. He sees that she is beautiful or tov, and he takes her. He uses that language. And it's clear, like when someone sees something and it's good, then you're like, uh-oh, here comes a test. Here comes a really important decision. If they go the wrong way, we could have another Garden of Eden moment, where someone is facing a temptation and they're supposed to resist it. So, to Diana's question, it says that he was fondling her. Yeah, the language there, it's basically that word, actually, literally, the verb means to laugh, but it has this kind of playful connotation to it. And in this context, you probably can't see down here, but it says sport or play, and then it says make sport for, toy with, of conjugal caresses. So the scene is they are being playfully intimate with each other. Abimelech looks out and he sees him being sexually active with her. Now, how he can see this, I don't know. But he can see it, and he's like, those two are not brother and sister. So,
let's say some Arkansas.
Man, that joke will never die. And so then he notices that, so it seems that we've avoided disaster. Abimelech had not taken her. Now, maybe it's because this is not Abimelech's first rodeo, right? Abimelech has been put in this situation not all that long ago by Isaac's father, Abraham, the exact same situation. And with Abraham, remember, the first time it happened was with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh took her. Seems like he made her his wife, and, whether he slept with her, we don't know. But it was almost a worst-case scenario with Sarah. Then, later on, with a different king, with Abimelech, Abraham does the exact same thing, lies, says she's his sister, but Abimelech doesn't take her as his wife. But it's kind of like, it's almost happens. And then Abimelech gets upset with Abraham. And then Abraham's son comes and does the same thing. So, I try to put myself in Abimelech's shoes, like, poor guy. Like this two guys come to him, lie to him in the exact same way. And both of them come into his land, and they're super fruitful. They multiply, they're rich, they're a blessing on the land. And eventually, he has the same issue with both of them, not just with their wives, but when Abraham's in the land and when Isaac's in the land, they grow and multiply, and then eventually, Isaac's people start fighting with Abimelech's people, just like Abraham's people had. And so they fight over springs. So then the rest of that story is about them, kind of getting in conflict with each other, and then eventually Abimelech has to go to Isaac and make the same covenant with him that he made with Abraham. I don't know if you read that, but with Abraham, Abimelech came with his army commander and said, hey, make a covenant with me that you're not going to come into my land and I'm not going to come into yours. What do you think the messaging is there when he brings his army commander with him? You think he's coming like, hey, buddy, sit down, have a beer. Like, don't worry about anything. It's kind of like, hey, why don't you make a covenant with us or else? I got my army guy right here. Let's hash this out right now. And so they make an oath and a covenant. And it's also around water. Remember last time I told you about how water is often where blessing is. You imagine you're in a desert, you come to water, that's where life is. That's where things multiply. And so they fight over these wells. So then we have this story of, let me pause for a second. Do you have any questions or comments at this point? No? Okay, so then we have the story of Jacob and his mother tricking Esau, or tricking Isaac, tricking the father. How does this story strike you? Isaac loves Esau. Rebekah loves Jacob. They each have their favorite. And Isaac is, blind, and he's wanting to bless his eldest son. And Rebekah plays a fast one on her own husband and helps Jacob to deceive her husband. And she tells Jacob, by her own initiative, she tells him what to do. How does this story strike you?
Jacob stayed around close to her, and I went off hunting. Esau went off hunting. Was gone a lot, probably.
So, maybe each parent kind of identifies more. Esau's the mighty hunter. He brings in the good meat. So, the dad likes that. Jacob's the one that stays at home, and he's a quiet guy, so the mom kind of gets to develop a relationship with him. Maybe that kind of explains why they have stronger bonds with them. But it doesn't make you feel conflicted at all that they seem to have these favorites?
Okay. But that happens pretty often.
Yeah.
That darn woman deceived that guy.
Yeah. Well, this is a story. This is a story where, and I've talked about this with you all before, this is a recurring thing where there's a woman who influences a man to either make a good choice, a wise choice, or an evil choice. And the point is not to say women always bring men to ruin. The point is to say, as we talked about this, women have power and influence over men. And so the question is, will a woman tempt a man towards wickedness, or will a woman use her power to bring him into righteousness? And you see that really clearly when you read the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, where it talks about the Lady Wisdom and the woman of folly. And they're each out calling to people. The Lady of Folly saying, hey, come in here, I've got sweet wine. And then she seduces them. And Lady Wisdom says, come. Lady Folly says, hey, stolen bread is sweet. She's stolen her stuff, and she's sleeping around with tons of men. Lady Wisdom has earned her goods. She has baked her own bread and prepared the food. It's her own, and she's worked for things. And she is not sleeping around with all the people she's inviting into her house. And so the depiction is of women have this incredible ability to bring men into wisdom or foolishness. And I think that's just common sense. I think anyone who's lived long enough knows many men have gone to their ruin because they let themselves get dragged into bad stuff with women, or many men have been brought into a relationship with a wise woman and become the better for it and more righteous.
We hope.
I'm confident it's already happening. So where this kind of comes in is, or let me kind of walk you through this idea. Jacob listens to the voice of his mother. You can see that in, let me see, where is that? Chapter 27, verse 13. But his mother said to him, "Your curse be on me, my son, but only obey my voice and go get them for me." Only obey my voice. And then, verse 22. So Jacob came close to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So you kind of have this voice thing going on. Whose voice to listen to? Whose voice is true? Verse 38. Well, that one's not as important. Verse 43. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee to Haran to my brother Laban. Okay? So there again, his mother's giving him instruction. Listen to my voice, obey me. And part of the question is, should he have listened to his mother? What do you think? Should he have listened to her? No. Catherine's vote is no.
As far as history is concerned, yes.
As far as history is concerned, yes. Why?
Well, everything began there about the disbursement.
So one could say maybe one interpretation would be maybe this was God's intention. The prophecy was that the elder shall serve the younger. So maybe this was God's intention. But let's think a little bit more about this, okay? Let's go back to, well, you don't have to turn there, but in Genesis 3, here, maybe I can, no, I can't really make this bigger. Genesis 3, verse 17, this is after they've eaten the fruit, and God is pronouncing judgment on each one of them. In verse 17, then he said to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. So Adam listened to the voice of Eve, and it was wrong, right? Wasn't a good thing.
Why do you suppose they didn't want to obey the voice of God?
Oh, this isn't.
Appetite was more important to them.
Oh, you are entering into a long, a 4,000-year debate. Was it because they were prideful and they wanted to be like God? Because the serpent said, God knows that if you eat of this fruit, you'll be like God. So maybe they were, it was pride. They wanted to be their own gods. In my sermon a few weeks ago, I told you the ancient church thought, many people thought the first sin was gluttony. They just gave in to wrong desire. They had more desire than they needed, and instead of having wisdom and accepting what God had given them, they took more than was given to them. So it's gluttony. Some have said it was envy. It's kind of similar to the pride idea. They looked at what God had, and they wanted it for themselves. They coveted God's, power or eternal life or something like that, his wisdom. And so they wanted it for themselves. So a good question, but nobody's ever come up with the definitive answer. You might just say all of the above, but Sharon, did you want to say something?
No, I think Esau was probably a son that was in trouble from the word go. I mean, he married the Canaanite women.
Yes.
And this was before, if this is how it is, before this blessing thing in 26. Mm-hmm. And it says they were a grief of mine to Isaac and Rebekah, the women that he married.
Yes.
And then the blessing, then he loses his blessing. So I think he's just a son that's just not, and maybe that had something to do with Rebekah.
Yeah, maybe. Well, and so part of the reason, yes, Sharon, I think that's awesome. It is showing that Esau seems to not be making good decisions. He gives up his birthright, classic mistake. Who in their right mind would give up everything, and then he chooses wives that don't please his parents. It's clear that he's kind of a fool. But the question is still, does that mean that what Jacob did and what his mother did was righteous, even if it ends up producing the result that God gave? Now think about with Abraham and Hagar and Sarah. Sarah was barren, so they tried to make the blessing happen by him sleeping with Hagar, and God made it pretty clear with time that was not how things were going to be done. And the point that Abraham had to learn was to trust in God that he was going to fulfill his promise, that it was going to come through Sarah, and that he was going to have a son. So by this point, the story has already trained us. It was a long time to wait. It was a hard test. But Genesis has already been trying to teach us, when God gives a promise, he will fulfill it. Wait and trust in him. So if that's what Abraham's story teaches us, how are we to interpret this story in which they kind of make the blessing happen? Now, it doesn't say that they were trying to make the blessing happen, but it seems pretty clear that the mom's trying to set up her son for success, right? She's trying to make everything go well for him. Now, there's also, this whole question of listening to the voice is something that comes up again and again. The voice, it becomes clear you're supposed to listen to the voice of God, obviously, right? And in Hebrew, the word for listen is very intricately connected to the idea of obeying. If you hear the word of God, you obey. So, there's other examples of this. In Genesis 4, when you had Cain's son Lamech, who killed someone and then bragged about it, Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. And then he says, if Cain was, protected and whoever killed Cain was killed sevenfold, Lamech will be avenged 77-fold or whatever. Should his wives have listened to his voice? No.
Maybe Abraham should have prayed for his wife to have life.
Yes. This is how I think Genesis is trying to teach you. When Isaac does this, you think, well, dang it, why didn't Abraham do that? If he could have just prayed for his wife and things would have gone differently. So maybe that is part of what it's trying to teach us.
Lack of communication.
Yeah, lack of communication. They say that's what you need. In Genesis 16, when Sarah comes up with the idea for him to sleep with Hagar, says, so Sarah said to Abram, now behold, Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Again, we have this question of should he listen to the voice?
And then here we are today.
But also, but also notice the point is always both the women laid the men astray and the men let themselves be led astray.
I'm sitting here thinking of our vice president. I'm going to figure that out.
You quit it.
You tell me.
You quit it. You quit it. We're going to keep.
How come there wasn't better communication?
We're going to keep this nice. You quit picking political fights. Now, but the point is, whatever. So the point is, by this point, Genesis has already been training us to see the story unfolding and know how to interpret it. I think that by this point, we should know Jacob shouldn't have cheated and deceived. That's what the serpent did. They shouldn't have tried to make the promise happen on their own because God will fulfill his promises. And he shouldn't have listened to the voice of his mother. He should have just listened to the voice of God and trusted in God's promise. Well,
it takes a long time to hear from God.
Yes. And we always have to be sympathetic when we're reading the Bible. It's hard. God tests his people, and the tests are hard. Abram had to wait for 25 years. Now, like Sharon said, maybe he wouldn't have had to wait so long if he had just prayed for Sarah to not be barren. Who knows? Also a good point. See, but I think this is how the Bible comes alive to us. We're allowed to ask these questions because it's partially through asking these questions that we start to pick up and realize that the Bible's giving us some of this information. Now, if you're interacting with the text and you start asking questions and you find that no matter how hard you try, it doesn't give you any answers, then a lot of the time it's good to say, I don't know, the Bible doesn't tell me. But I think the Bible is giving us some of these answers here of how humans are supposed to be faithful and obedient to God. We're supposed to wait on his promises. And that often, as we're waiting on his promises, we are supposed to be in prayer and intercession for one another, for the things that we hope for, right? Any last words or questions?
Are we on 28 next time? No?
Yeah, I think we will go ahead and go on to 28 next time. The beginning of 28 kind of let me read this real quick. Chapter 28, verse 1. Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, you shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take his wife from there, one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he charged him, you shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took to wife, besides the children he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. So just quick couple things. One way I go there is like, wait, he's told to leave the land. Is this a problem? Like God didn't want him to go to Egypt. But I think a couple answers to that would be, well, one of the descendants of the promise is still in the land. Isaac is going to stay there. Two, he's going to his relatives, which is kind of ensuring keeping the blessing in the line of the family. This is what Isaac, well, actually, Abram, well, you know what? Let me think about this. Abram sent his servant to go out of the land and to get a wife for him. So when we see Isaac sending his son to go away, I think it's a good question for us to go, is this a good idea? Should Jacob be leaving the land? Abraham sent his servant and made sure, and when the servant said, hey, if she won't come with me, should I come and get Isaac and bring him up? And he said, no, if she won't come with you, then, basically give up. It's a lost cause. You've fulfilled your oath. So Abraham is really concerned to keep Isaac in the land. So I think it might be fair for us to think, is it going to be a problem for Isaac to leave the land? And what do you think? For Jacob to leave the land? How does it go for Jacob that he leaves the land and goes up there? Yeah, he's gone for a long time. It turns into a big problem. He's gone for 20 years. I think maybe we're supposed to read this part and go, no, don't leave the land. This is a bad idea, man. But that's just my feeling. But then also, as you noticed earlier, we had found out earlier that Esau's first couple of wives were not pleasing to Isaac. So then he picks it up, and then he goes and marries Ishmael's daughters, which seems like better, but maybe also not ideal. Like he doesn't go up to the right lineage to get someone to marry. He goes to Ishmael, who did receive a promise, but not the blessing. So kind of seems like he got out of the blessing and he's staying out of the blessing. He's trying to keep it in the family. He's trying to please his parents, but he's still not like making things right, is maybe one way to interpret that. I'm not sure. There could be other ways to interpret that. Any last thoughts or questions? I feel like, I have a lot to learn as a teacher and as a student of the Bible. But I've gotten a lot of training and I've spent a lot of time in the Word. And for what it's worth, I think you all are becoming really, really good readers of the Bible. I think you're learning to ask the right questions. You're learning to think as I think the Bible wants us to think. So I just want to affirm you. I think you're all doing really great. I'm really impressed with your questions. And the more that we do this, the more fun I have. So thank you all. How about I pray for us? Holy God, thank you for being so patient with us. As was remarked tonight, we wouldn't blame you for having a headache. We are so slow to get things and to believe in your promises and to trust you to follow through. We're so slow to pray and to ask you for what we need. God, help us to learn from your word what you've taught us today, to wait on you, to trust you, to ask you for what we need, and to be obedient to you, knowing that obedience will bring us blessing. So we thank you for your Son and how he was perfectly obedient. We thank you that because of your Spirit who dwells in us and among us, we can be obedient too, and how you've promised us that blessing of the inheritance of your kingdom and of your Spirit and the fruit of your Spirit. You've promised us eternal life. Thank you, God. Praise you. Hallelujah. You are good. We love you. Thank you so much for loving us, your children. Amen.
Margie, did you bring any cookies today?